When it comes to American football, but it really hit the nail on the head of the point I was trying to make. The Green Bay Packers are a pretty well-known organization. It pains me to put this up here because I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan and they are my rival. But the late great coach from the Green Bay Packers, Vince Lombardi, once said, "Hope is not a strategy." Very simple, very easy, very poignant. The best quotes often are. And that ties into data resiliency in so many ways, especially in the cloud. There's many folks, many companies out there that assume just because I put my data with a vendor in the cloud, it's safe there. It's protected there, that's my redundancy, that's my backup. That is simply not the case. From a data resiliency and a planning perspective, you need to make sure that your data in the cloud is secure. You can hope that you never have to use it, but you need to plan for the worst. Now let's talk about the key pillars of data resiliency. Data resiliency, I'm not going to hit like the definition over the head for you all, but really it's all about minimizing the downtime for your organization. Making sure that your organization is resilient, being able to recover if there's outages, if there's data deletion, if there's breaches, how quickly can you get up and running again? And so there's a lot of themes in that, but I bucketed them into three core pillars. You've got business continuity and disaster recovery. Again, minimizing that downtime for your organization. If something goes down, how quickly can you get up and running again? Backup and recovery. This is one that obviously we really love from a company standpoint, but ensuring your critical data is backed up and secure. Making sure you've got the correct versions, the correct selection of data that you're protecting to make sure that you can minimize data loss. And then last but certainly not least, security and compliance. Protecting the data. It's not enough that you've got it backed up. You need to make sure that you have contingencies for ransomware, for unauthorized access, making sure that you can, again, get up and running in short order. Now, I put together a very rudimentary timeline. I promise I won't spend a ton of time on it, but in order to understand where we are today, we need to understand how we got to where we're at today. And so, three key bullets to focus on. The furthest left, data on-premise. This predates me even, but back in the day, you had your data on-premise. You had physical servers. You had it locked down. You were able to do the redundancy very easy, make sure that data was protected. Around the mid to late 2000s, arguably, workforce mobility comes into play. You start having laptops taking, prominent hold from your workforce. You had workers creating content and making content on the go, at will. So that's where a lot of tools that started coming in with automated iterative backup really started to take a foothold. It started to silo because you still had information on-prem, but now you had information on your endpoints as well. And then last is where we're at with the cloud migration. Arguably late 2000s, early 2010s, somewhere in that range, all of these cloud vendors started coming up. Your OneDrives, your Googles, your Box, your Dropbox, Slack, Teams, Salesforce. Data became more fragmented than it ever has before. This is where the gap comes in. Because even though this is not this is not a new problem, the cloud migration has been happening, arguably has happened for some time. But what happened as a result of many companies is when they started putting their data in the cloud, they went, okay, that vendor will hold the data for me. That is now where my data is living. And because it's Google, because it's Microsoft, because it's Amazon, it won't go down. They have great uptime. They do a really good job of keeping uptime for it. But by the own definition of these companies, and what they deem, or what they term, and I'll have a slide for it here in a second, called the shared responsibility model, they specify that you are responsible for your data. You need to make sure you're holding on to it, you have the right versioning for it, the right protection for it, to make sure that you're in accordance with whatever kind of governance or compliance regulations that you have to hold it on to. So why is this a gap? Again, I'm not going to hit it, I already kind of touched on it to some extent, but three main things I wanted to call out. The assumption that cloud provides fully protected data. So the idea that your vendor is responsible for protecting all of that information, simply not true. they state that you need to be responsible for your data. They're going to do their best to keep it up and running, but it's not a data backup solution, which brings you to the second point. If you have considerations for holding onto that data for anything beyond a couple months, you should be really exploring how do we do that in the most pragmatic fashion. And then last, again, compliance and long-term data retention gaps, which I already kind of touched on. I mentioned shared responsibility. Here's the slide for it. The shared responsibility model, it's essentially a framework. So it's something that's kind of agnostic to a company. But if you go to Google, if you go to Amazon, if you go to Microsoft, they all have their own versions of it where they have matrices, they lay out, and I'll share Microsoft's version or flavor specific to SaaS platforms here in the next slide. But they essentially state out and break it out to saying, hey, as we, the cloud provider, we are responsible for the following things. We're responsible for the infrastructure, the hardware of our infrastructure, software and the networks, giving you the security measures you need to make sure you're locking your data down to the right needs of your organization. But as you, the customer, you are responsible for safeguarding your data for the long haul. You need to make sure that not only do you have the data secure, but that you're leveraging the security protocols that we provide to make sure that you have your stuff buttoned up and locked down tight. I mentioned Microsoft, so you can go to any of the sites, like through Amazon, through Google, they all have them. But this one is specific to an M365 customer, SaaS with Microsoft. You can see the breakdown that they have where they show their responsibilities, a shared responsibility, and the customer's responsibility. This is something that many organizations simply just kind of turn a blind eye to. They assume that, hey, you know what, it's going to be safe. Microsoft doesn't go down. They don't have data loss situations. And to their credit, they're really, really good at preventing that. But I mean, one example that I have shared in the past is, we all remember CrowdStrike last year. This stuff can happen. So how do you make sure that if it does happen, you can get up and running and stay resilient in those situations? Another example that I wanted to call out is the rising threat from malicious actors that are targeting cloud data. So when you look at this particular example, this is Hewlett-Packard Enterprises. They had a breach back in 2023 where they saw malicious actors using Cozy Bear were able to infiltrate some Office 365 accounts and expose corporate data. That's something that when you start thinking about the other things that they can take action on, removing that data, removing the redundancies or the backups of that information, that becomes a major concern. It's not lost on malicious actors when it comes to like, hey, this is a honeypot. There's a lot of data that is in the cloud, and we can spend a lot, if we can get the right level of access, or if an organization doesn't have the correct security protocols in place, it's very easy for them to get a lot of information. Now, I mentioned CrashPlan again. Shameless plug of what we do and why we can solve this problem, why I'm up here talking to you all. From a CrashPlan perspective, we provide automated backups, continuous, iterative, down to real-time versioning of it. Ransomware protection, again, we eliminate that use case. So if with real-time versioning, you don't really need to bite into ransomware because you can just restore from a minute, a couple minutes before, and get up and running again. Very good for data resiliency in that respect. Data encryption, make sure you've got end-to-end encryption. We start the encryption from the moment it leaves the endpoint. It gets transmitted through an encrypted pipe and stays encrypted at rest. And then flexible recovery and comprehensive reporting. It's not enough to make sure that we provide the flexibility in how you restore. It can be as simple as a file or an email, or as great as an entire system. But you also need to make sure you have the reporting on it. We used to use a slogan, set it and forget it, and that, was a slick slogan. But it's not really, as time went on, we realized that's really kind of a misleading statement. You should be going back and checking your backups. You should make sure that your health of your archives and the health of your data are trending in the right direction. So, protecting cloud data in the shared responsibility model. Now, these are just kind of general how-to tips. Hopefully some of them are not new to you because they've been around for some time. But these are things that you want to do in general to help make sure that your data is secure. Adopt the 3-2-1 backup strategy. This one's been around for a while, so hopefully everybody's heard it. But 3 copies of your data, 2 locally, 1 in the cloud or offsite. That's what you should be doing to make sure that that data is secure and safe. Use automated backup tools. If it's not us, there's other solutions out there. Again, real-time backups, versioning, control. You can do it with employees that are off-site and working around in real time. It's a great solution to be able to make sure that data is getting protected as quickly as it possibly can. Enforce strong controls, multi-factor authentication, least privilege access. These are things that you need to do to make sure that you're locking down your devices and that you have the correct protocols in place to prevent unauthorized access. Monitor and audit your cloud resources. Again, this goes back to the set it and forget it lifestyle. You need to be monitoring. You need to be checking in. You don't have to do it every day, but you should be coming back to things and making sure that everything is trending in the right direction. Your backups are healthy. Identify if there's any anomalous behavior or if there's anything that you need to follow up on. And then lastly, document those processes. I can't tell you how many companies we run into where it kind of becomes something where a single individual or a couple individuals have that information and that's it. And then an individual leaves and that process doesn't get revisited because it's not documented anymore. Turnover happens at organizations, and on top of that, evolution of data happens at organizations. Tools get moved in and out pretty regularly. So making sure that you're covering new cloud solutions, covering your backup strategies, and that data is under that umbrella is a key piece of this equation. All right, so we're at the home stretch here. I know I've been talking fast, so I'm gonna try to slow it down a little bit. But if there's nothing else I want you to learn and take away from this, it's that first bullet, top left. Cloud providers don't fully protect your data. That's not to knock cloud providers, because they are great. They have some level of redundancy in them. But the assumption shouldn't be made that if I need to recover a file from a year, 2 years ago, or what have you, or if something happens where that data gets breached, accidental deletion, and we don't realize till a point in time, that you shouldn't have that be your sole source of data. You need to have a redundancy in that respect. From a data fragmentation creates resiliency gaps. That was a mouthful. Apologies. I went over this with my timeline, but it's a natural thing of business. Data is going to be fragmented. And so it's how do you provide a solution or solutions that can make you resilient in your day-to-day effort at your organization. Solutions like what we do with CrashPlan are able to help accomplish that, both in the cloud as well as on endpoints. And then cyber threats increasingly targeting cloud destinations, cloud storage. So important, I actually put it up there twice. It's one of those things that it's not lost on malicious actors that they are targeting that data. It's a honeypot for them. It is where there's a lot of collaborative information, a lot of valuable information from their end that they can just mine as opposed to going individual user by individual user. So it's something that you want to be very mindful of. It's not lost on malicious actors for this. And then those best practices that I went over, I'm not going to go over them again. But again, there are steps you can take regardless of what tools or solutions you go with to ensure that your data is protected and that from a data resiliency perspective, if the worst happens, you're prepared and you can minimize the amount of time that you're down. So with that, there we go. I wanted to actually skip the questions. Are there any questions pertaining to data resiliency? Sorry, I didn't see. Was there one? Is there any?
Thank you for the talk.
Yeah.
Quite informative. So my understanding of CrashPlan is basically data resiliency, which is perfect. But is CrashPlan able to provide the service to an organization that hasn't moved to the cloud? So maybe, for example, you've got your data on-prem only, right? is CrashPlan also able to provide that service?
It's not something that we offer today. Oddly enough, years ago we used to have a solution, which probably doesn't help in your instance, but because the cloud became such a standard, we moved to that kind of practice. So when it comes to backing up on-prem data, again, it depends on the nature of what the data is. We do have a server offering, so depending on the type of server, if that's what's on-prem and you're looking to back up, depending on the nature of the server, the type of data that's in there, that certainly could be a solution that we could help to support. But because of just how prevalent the move to the cloud was, that's where we wanted to focus on being cloud first. But we do provide some flexibility there.
Any more questions? Oh.
Hi, thanks again for your talk.
Of course.
My questions are around what kind of files do you back? Are these just file storage or block storage? For example, do you back up databases like MySQL, Postgres, or so?
Most of our customers use us for file-based storage. The kind of under the covers how-to for how we are able to provide iterative backups is block-based. So that's what does give us the ability to do incremental backups. But to your point, we do most of the time focus on files, if you will, or in like a database from like a, or not really a database, but like a PST perspective, or like your Exchange when it comes to M365, your Outlook, SharePoint, those types of situations. So we don't typically do databases. It's usually file server focused.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any more? Yeah.
Sorry, did you just say it's file server focused?
Well, I mean, that's what most of our customers end up using us for.
Okay.
But again, depending on the nature of the server, the nature of the data, that's where we would want to have a conversation to see if our tool is the best one to support you. If you had a certain data set or like certain kind of a server that wasn't a file server, just to make sure that we could back it up and support it accordingly. But most of our customers do use us for file server basis when it is a server itself. But we do have a lot of customers that use us for endpoints as well as cloud.
That's more the M365.
Yes, much more. So actually our move to backing up cloud repositories like M365, or we're going into early access here shortly for Google Workspace, that's a recent addition to what we've done, and it's because of that fragmented market around just where your data is. Having it in the cloud and making sure that we can provide that same level of backup is a key piece in the cloud. But for a long time, when you look at those 15 years that we've been around, for those initial probably 10 years or so, we were very focused on the endpoint space.
So does that mean for M365 you provide the two media one offset?
So, sorry, can you state that again?
You have the free backups. Two media one offsite.
Got it. So when it comes to M365, you have the option to do that. So we do have customers that pay to have us store the data in two different like unique like locations for our cloud. So East Coast, West Coast, or in Europe and somewhere else, for instance. So that is one way to do it. But you can also, using CrashPlan, have the ability to do like a local offsite as well. So you can configure to make a local copy of that data, so that you have a second like a local offsite version.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, here you go.
So thank you for the time. I joined quite late. The question is, do you have your own infrastructure? Do you build on any existing infrastructure?
So what about infrastructure?
You got AWS,
So we do have an option to leverage AWS. We do have some customers that we're able to store their archives in AWS, but we also do have our own proprietary cloud locations across the globe. So US, Singapore, Australia, and the UK.
So you have availability zones as well?
I'm sorry.
You have availability zones.
Yeah.
Data,
Correct. Yeah, we have those available.
Anybody else? We have 2 minutes. I think this has been the most on time presentation I've seen today.
We tried.
It's really good. Anybody else? Okay, I think that's all the questions, and thank you so much, Jared, for presenting about data resiliency.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Applause.
Appreciate it.